Welcome, everyone. We're so grateful that you're here with us today. As we're letting people in, we're thankful for your presence today. My name is Aaron Cobb. I'm Senior Scholar of Character for the Educating Character Initiative, and it's a privilege to be able to host this first webinar of our fall semester series. Welcome to ECI's Back to School. I want to start today with just a few announcements, and then I'll introduce our series and our session leaders for today. So the first announcement is we would just really love to invite you to join the community. And if you've already joined our ECI community, we would love for you to encourage your colleagues to join the community. We care about connecting, about building this community, about learning from you all, and developing strong relationships that can support our collective goal of building a movement for character education in higher ed. By joining the community, you gain access to information about upcoming grants initiatives. You'll receive our monthly newsletter. So there's a link to join in the chat. Please join us. Second, I wanted to make sure that all of you saw the announcements we made over the summer about our recent capacity building and institutional impact grant awards. We're placing those links in the chat as well. You'll get to see, if you click on those links, you'll see some of the exciting projects that are about to start across the nation at these new grantee institutions. And this is a good chance for me to plug for the first time our 2026 grants initiative that will be underway very soon. We hope to send out the request for proposals probably early October, so be paying close attention to that. Third, I just want to make you alert you to some upcoming educational opportunities through the ECI. So the first, of course, is this webinar series. We have a monthly series. We're hosting events in September and in October, November, and December. And we're excited for this series about community and character formation. So please, if you haven't registered for all of those, please register for those sessions coming up. And then fourth, and finally, the book club. We've modified our book club format for this fall to an author meets readers conversation. So you'll have a chance to talk with authors of books that I think have a great deal to teach us about character formation. This fall, we'll be discussing Karen Storr's book, Minding the Gap, Moral Ideals and Moral Improvement, and Kate Denial's book, A Pedagogy of Kindness. So you'll find those links in the chat. Please avail yourself of those opportunities that are coming up soon. This fall's webinar series is focused on community for, with, and a character for, with, and in community. This is something that's become very clear to us throughout our efforts in the ECI has been the importance of community to character building efforts. Characters formed within and by communities, living together well in communities requires good character. A part of what it means to express character is to orient ourselves towards the common good, the goods of communities. So we want to spend time thinking about these questions this semester, and by thinking about how character is formed for and with and in communities. Today's session is the first of our series, and I'm glad to introduce you today to our session leaders, Kimara Ellefson and Jeff Fritz, both of the Kern National Network for Flourishing in Medicine. Kimara is National Director of Strategy and Partnerships for KNN. In this role, she partners with medical schools and healthcare organizations to help shape organizational cultures for flourishing and provides leadership for the KNN Program Office in developing strategic plans to grow their network. Jeff serves as the Associate Director for Learning and Partnership Development with KNN and is also an Associate Professor in the Department of Cell Biology, Neurobiology, and Anatomy at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He's earned a master's degree in transformational leadership and also holds a master's of arts from the character education from the University of Birmingham. Kimara and Jeff, we're pleased to welcome you to this webinar and to invite you to lead us in your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Aaron. It is a true delight for us to be here and welcome everyone. I couldn't resonate more with the idea of character happening in community and the importance of community. And I think you will see that as a definite theme as we go throughout our time together. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we hope to cover throughout our time together, we are looking at giving you a sense of how we advance flourishing across the health ecosystem. Next slide, please, Jeff. Looking at our framework for flourishing, thinking about the place of character in that, as well as that of caring and practical wisdom. And then we would like to give you an idea of how we are really putting this into practice, deeply, deeply rooted in community, and then certainly want to allow some time for questions. And I might just add that if you do have questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will be excited to think about those along with you near the end. So I thought I would start by just really telling you the story of the Kern National Network for Flourishing in Medicine. It really started in community. It started with a group of individuals within academic medicine that were concerned about the fact that the focus within medical education had that the pendulum had swung so far to competence that there wasn't a focus on character. There wasn't a focus on who we were forming as we were educating new physicians. And so you see here that it was representatives from these 7 founding member schools that came together and decided that they wanted to think about a medical education process that could be deeply rooted in character. And so out of that dream came the Kern National Network for Flourishing in Medicine. We now are a movement of 50 plus organizations across the health ecosystem that are interested in looking at the concepts of character, of caring, of practical wisdom, how those concepts are interdependent and weave together to really create both individual flourishing as well as organizational, systemic, or community flourishing. And we believe that character is the bedrock of all of this, that it is as we understand the place of virtue, both in our individual formation and formation of the cultures that we are fostering, that it is only then that we are able to really move forward in a caring with perspective and bring the wisdom and the deep critical thinking that is so necessary in the world of education today. So you've heard me use the word flourishing a number of times now, and flourishing is actually in the name of our organization. And there are many different ways to look at flourishing. We're going to offer for you today our definition for flourishing, the lens through which we view the work, not to say that this is the lens all should use or the only lens that one should use, but just to give you a sense that this is the lens that we use. And so this comes to us from the work of Dr. Francis Su, who's a mathematician that wrote a book, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, and in there talks about the place of math and math education and how that can advance flourishing and flourishing cultures. And we really love the way that Francis Su talks about flourishing as being a wholeness of being and doing. This is where we really see the place of character deeply rooting in who we are becoming. And as we think about education and being educators, we think about how are we forming both modeling virtue and character and allowing others to think about how they can enter into that space authentically. We think about how we model it, our wholeness of being, and then that this is something that isn't a pursuit simply for our own happiness or our own edification, but that this happens in community and in service to others. And so we see that in this idea of being and doing. There's an action orientation around this. We work on our interior lives. We reflect on character and virtue so that we might act and be of service service to the communities of which we are a part, realizing our own potential and then helping others to do the same. Thinking about how we are doing all of this in service to our community, the places and spaces in which we have influence, and the people that come across our path. And so I might just say that we look at flourishing as the embodiment of character, caring, and practical wisdom towards the service of the communities of which we are a part. And as far as the Kern National Network for Flourishing in Medicine is concerned, we are really looking at this within the health ecosystem, but we believe that these concepts and these ideas and the way that we approach it are really germane to any context and translate accordingly. So maybe I will just have you take a look at our North Star, our framework for flourishing. This is our model. So you see here that we look at character and caring as being, part of that trunk system of the tree and practical wisdom there as well. We lean into the imagery of a tree because we believe that these things are both aspirational and realized all at the same time. This is where I often like to lean into a famous theologian who says, I am the beloved and I am becoming the beloved. As we think about character, as we think about our own sense of becoming and the becoming that we are looking to foster in others, we may say to ourselves, there are these aspects of our character that we have today, and we are always becoming. There's always an opportunity to grow more courageous, right? More understanding, more humble, those sorts of things. And so we see this tree and the multicolored leaves as this opportunity to understand that we are all also in different places in our journey. And that is part of what it means to be human, and that we don't expect that every day, all the time, we will feel a sense of flourishing, but these are things that we are working towards. The blue concentric circles that you see on the outside of the tree really represent a socio-ecological model, so it's sort of leaning into Braunhofer's idea that we live within a system. That system has impact on us as individuals within it, but that we also believe that we have agency within that system to impact the system, that we can influence, and that particularly together we have an opportunity to impact the systems and the communities of which we are a part. And we do believe that it is as we deeply lean into the concepts of caring, character, and practical wisdom that we are creating both individual as well as system level flourishing. So maybe I will take just a moment to unpack for you a little bit in terms of what we mean and the framework that we use when we talk about character. Again, I will suggest this is not, we're not suggesting it as the way or the right way, but simply the way that we look at it, understanding what our important theoretical framework is. So we lean heavily into the work of the Jubilee Center out of the University of Birmingham. We think of character not as something that one has or doesn't have, but rather we lean into this idea of the fact that we are all multi-dimensional, complex individuals, which means that our character really makes up the various dimensions or facets or virtues that we are seeking. The next slide really gives you an idea of what the building blocks of character are from the University of Birmingham's model. You'll notice here, if we have any philosophers that are joining us, you will notice a very neo-Aristotelian bent. It was really Aristotle that introduced to us these various types of virtues with some examples. One of the reasons that we really like this is it can help to take a concept like character, which sometimes can feel unreachable or difficult to make it sticky or tangible, and brings it down to a place where we can say, okay, I understand what compassion is, I understand what gratitude is, I understand what critical thinking is, what it means to be curious. And it allows us to begin to think about these various dimensions of our character, and how we may or may not be displaying them in any particular moment or time in our lives. In particular, as we think about character, we really do see this as the foundational element. So if we think about what it means to form students, learners, leaders with integrity and authenticity, we see that character is really a fundamental element of that. Next slide, please, Jeff. I have had an opportunity to do a lot of leadership work. I'm sure many of you have as well. And it's interesting to me that as we talk about all of the many leadership programs that exist, oftentimes in our spaces, leadership is still listed as one of the greatest challenges, or maybe one of the greatest barriers to flourishing. And we often will describe leaders as not often representing integrity or authenticity or character. So one of the things that we really like to do is think about the place of virtue and character and what it means to show up authentically according to the virtues that we hold as being really primary to this work that we're doing to create and advance cultures of flourishing. We next lean into practical wisdom. We see practical wisdom as that which allows us to look at our lived experiences as well as the narratives that we have observed and heard from other people's lived experiences, and translating that into, if you will, the right thing to do at the right time based on a particular circumstance with a particular context. I might say here that this is where we say context matters, that this work that we are all doing in terms of advancing character within our spaces does need to be deeply contextualized. We need to understand the spaces and the places that we are working within, and meet them where they're at and how to move that forward. So practically speaking, how do we look at expressing practical wisdom or gaining practical wisdom? We really see practical wisdom as being in many ways what we would say the meta virtue that helps us understand how to express our character or those various building blocks of character based on the situation. There are times that demonstrating courage may be that I speak up, and there are other times that demonstrating courage might be that I remain silent and remove myself from a situation. We would suggest that it is practical wisdom that helps us understand how to do that. Much like flourishing, we do not see practical wisdom as a moment in which someone arrives, but rather that it is an iterative process of reflection, of discernment, of deliberation, and then an active integration into changed behavior. And perhaps one of the most powerful elements, we believe, of practical wisdom or phronesis is that which is gained by having a cacophony of voices at the table, coming together as a community and allowing for people's viewpoints and framing to be brought to the table, so that we might be stronger together. And this also, I think, serves as a way to reduce hierarchy, to sort of equalize power, especially in situations where there may be power paradigms that make it a little bit more difficult or challenging for some in the power paradigm to explore the concept of character and virtue and wisdom. Finally, caring. We lean into the work of Joan Tronto, who is one of the original feminist care ethicists in this country, who really takes a look at caring as being something that is critical to a flourishing democracy, and sees that caring really starts with you and me and then spreads out from there. We look at caring as not being so much a caring for as it is a caring with, this idea that we will work to meet people where they are at, and then walk alongside them to help them get to where they need to go. So again, we look at this and we think about this in terms of, what might patient care tell us about this? In the world of medical education, we put a lot of emphasis on understanding and knowing the patient, understanding what their life desires are, not just coming up with a standard of care for everybody across the board, but understanding what goals are. And we think about how we might apply that to one another as we work with one another. How are we stopping to get to know our colleagues, to understand what is valuable to them, what brings them meaning and purpose, and how we can foster cultures in which we really understand and recognize really the responsibility and the accountability that we have to one another. And so Joan would suggest that as we do this with each other, that this flows out into our institutions, our communities, and then into our democracy. So that is just a pebble in the pond of what our framework is. We really do this through the vehicle of community. So our theory of change is to connect, convene, catalyze towards influence. So we bring people together, believing that that place of collective phronesis is where ideas are catalyzed and systems can be influenced through change. We have 5 national strategies that guide our work: sharing and practice community, developing leaders for flourishing, bridging across differences. We really do desire to change systems and cultures, and we really believe that it's important to make this part of the national dialogue through scholarship, dissemination, and convenings. So as we look at all of that, it's our desire to walk you through a really practical example of how we're applying the framework and really building that community that we believe can really, if you will, disrupt the environments we're in. And so I would love to pass it to my colleague, Dr. Jeff Fritz, as he'll walk us through what we're doing within our learner community. Jeff?
Thank you, Dr. Ellefson. That was a wonderful overview and so much in such a short period of time. Thanks a bunch. So today we're going to focus in on the KNN Learner Network. The Learner Network is intended to provide structured programming for actually taking the KNN framework into the context of our learners in the health profession space. But this work really is led by 2 wonderful people, Joelle and Lamia, and I would be remiss to not highlight the fact that they are the ones who are deeply engaged in this work. And unfortunately, if they had been available, I would have probably had them give this conversation than myself, but they are off working with our learners at this moment and forwarding this work. So again, the Learner Network is put together to provide an opportunity for our learners to look for the framework and its application in their environment. They are empowered and suggested to look for ways to implicate and imply how this KNN framework could find meaning not only in their personal environments, but also in the learning and practice environments in which they find themselves. Our hope with the KNN Learner Network is that our learners will move towards both the long-term goals of individual and system transformation in the promotion of both character and caring, as well as the deep opportunity to practice the experience of flourishing. So a little bit of what happens with our learner networks is we spend time together with our learners. And again, in our space, we define learners primarily as med students, residents, interns, and fellows. But I should let you know that we are expanding this into nursing education and hopefully a few other areas of the pre-health education spaces this year. What I'm sharing today will simply focus on what we've been able to do with med students. So again, we really are excited that these learner chapters are happening throughout the country. It provides us through the framework to share a language by which we can dialogue about the concepts within the KNN framework and bring the concepts of character into the discussion space of what it means to be and become a medical practitioner. We hopefully empower our trainees to suggest ways in which they could co-create with their institutions on programming on how the KNN framework could actually sort of enhance, but also improve their learning and practice environments. And again, our long-term goal is to look for ways by developing these learners into future leaders by which we can shift practices, culture, systems, and policies to promote flourishing and the development of character in medicine. We are informed by a number of wonderful works, some of which you will notice familiarity here on this page today, but we really try to help our students think through using backward design. What are the goals they hope to reach, and how can they work from the sort of finishing with the end in sight at their moments? And then how do they really move into not just the practice of this, but the adaptation and the cultivation of flourishing amongst their peers? And so this really becomes a program that's focused on an us movement rather than an I movement. And within that space, amount of reflective practice so that we can begin to look for ways in which we include both faculty and staff in the process of engaging with our learners and the learner network. You might be asking yourselves what we do with these learners over the period of time. And the great thing is in medical school, we have 4 years with our cohorts. So we engage them at any stage of the medical education training that they're at. And at each of the medical schools, we try to open up a student chapter. We currently have 45 chapters, which I'll highlight on my next slide, but these chapters are led by a faculty leader. And through the process of engaging with us over the years, we have a Becoming series. This is a virtual series by which our students serve as presenters. They actually put forward an application where they want to share with their peers, where they've seen character caring come into life and into their space, and how that promotes flourishing. This is a virtual series that happens during the 9 months of the academic year that we call Becoming. We also have a KNN student conference, which our first student conference, which was a couple years ago, had 60 students from across the nation. Our most recent conference had 130 students at, and you'll see pictures of them here at this conference, where they actually serve as presenters, leaders, and develop the conference themselves. They actually have a competition for which campus gets to hold the annual conference at. This year it's in the sort of the North Carolina area, so it moves across the country. And then we also encourage our learners to present at our national conference, and we've had a number of opportunities to highlight their work and their learning to how it could influence both educators and practitioners within the space of flourishing in medicine. So again, initially in the fall of 2022, we started with 8 sites. We now currently have 45 sites. And again, at these sites, we allow the students to sort of engage and volunteer how they're going to move forward with the KNN Framework learning and its application. I would also let you know that they get sort of the same little flourishing workshop that Kimara just gave you, but with an opportunity for more detail. And they work with their faculty student chapter champion to also look for ways to continue to engage the learning in this as they move through the year and recruit other peers into this space. And as we talked about, they then get the opportunity to share with each other nationally in the Becoming series and through these conferences what they're learning and how they're growing in the areas of actually making character come to life, having caring become a place where they care with one another and co-journey through that experience in deeper ways, and also look for ways in which they've talked about how they've had to develop practical wisdom as it relates to not only clinical decision making, but also going through the challenges of what they're facing as learners. Again, just wanted to highlight the Becoming series is a virtual series that happens monthly throughout the academic year. And in this place, the students take a key role in sharing their thoughts on topics related to the framework. They actually have an application process, which I'll share with you in a second. They also then present at our annual student conference, which really allows them the opportunity, I think, to grow and develop as leaders and really move into that space of understanding what does it mean to display virtue as you flourish and care for one another. And then again, also at the national conference, it not only gives them the chance to work with other learners, but also the chance to work with their future faculty peers and practitioner peers as they journey through this space. I would like to add really quick, one of the fun sort of unique byproducts that the Learner Network has done is we started out in the medical school. If you're not familiar with medicine, medical students go off to residency before they can become doctors. And as they've moved into residency, they said, where can we do this and how can we impact our residents to do this? So they're already displaying opportunities for leadership and the courage to step up to their residency directors and sort of move this forward. I just wanted to share some of the materials and scaffolding that we provide for the learners is we actually ask them to fill out budgets and make requests and put forward applications in their processes of joining us and Becoming. And then the great work that they do with the poster, and you'll notice the tree is highlighted, where we ask them to call out how have their efforts promoted and developed key aspects of the integrated nation of the KNN framework. I wanted to pause for a moment and give ample time for questions. I know we went through a lot of material really fast and did want to thank you for your attention in learning about one of the many aspects on how the KNN is hoping to promote virtue development and character expression through the promotion of flourishing in healthcare. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so we can all see one another.
Thank you so much, Jeff and Kimara. It was great to hear the overview, both in terms of the broad network and the framework, and also to think more specifically about the learner networks and the student learner network. So thank you so much for that. Um, there's a question already in the chat, and I wanna step back for just a minute. It has to do with caring, and I think I was also interested in the definition of caring that you had in the framework, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about the sort of theoretical background. In the definition, I noticed you had it was practices, dispositions, and motivations oriented in a certain sort of direction. I'm wondering if you might say a little bit more about that sort of theoretical frame to caring in this space. You also made a distinction between caring with and caring for that I think is crucial as well. So just invite you to say a little bit more about that. And in the chat, one of the participants asked about whether you connected all
Yeah.
with Dr. Gene Layton's caring science theory.
Yeah. Thank you, Erin, for that question. And thank you, Ali, as well, for your question. Let me answer the two, and I also want to invite Jeff's voice into this conversation as well. So maybe I will start by just saying that Joan Tronto, Dr. Tronto, really lays out 4 elements as we think about caring. And the first is that we have a sense of attentiveness to the other. So this starts as simple as I notice, I'll just, Jeff, if it's okay, I will pull you into this example. I notice that there might be something going on with Jeff, and I'm open to inquiring about that, or that at some basic level, I care enough to recognize and understand Jeff as a colleague. She then would say that there is a level of responsibility that I have to one in my community to think about what attributes or resources that I may have to bring to the care that may be necessary. And so, keeping the example very simple, right? It could be a listening ear. It could be a word of wisdom. It could be a ministry of presence, which is just simply being with Jeff at a certain time. To give a very practical example around ways that certain organizations, one in particular, a large healthcare system, they have implemented this idea through the sense of a Plimsoll line. So that's the line that's painted on a boat. If you ever wondered, Mr. Plimsoll discovered that if the water goes over this line in a boat, you indeed will drown. And so the exercise is this idea of I could come up to Jeff at any moment. I could be like, hey, Jeff, where's your Plimsoll line at today? And he could say it's here, or it could be here. And Joan would say that just asking that question is being attentive. And then after Jeff shows me where his Plimsoll line is at, I have a responsibility to ponder as to whether or not I could say, Jeff, is there anything that I might be able to do to help reduce that Plimsoll line for you? She then goes on to say that I would meet Jeff where he's at, not where I would want him to be. I think about this a lot in the learner space. What does it mean for us to meet people where they are? So in other words, I don't go into advice giving to Jeff, but rather I pause and I care where Jeff happens to be in that moment. And then finally, and this might be the most powerful element of this definition, you'll see here all along we're caring with Jeff, not for Jeff, right? I'm not bringing in my expertise to tell Jeff what he should do. I'm walking alongside. And finally, she would suggest that it is only in a dialogical relationship, or only at the point that I also make myself vulnerable to Jeff around what my needs may be, that we can truly enter into a caring with relationship. In medicine, in academic medicine, this is very powerful because we have some deep hierarchies between faculty, student, professor, learner. And this idea that Jeff as a professor could have a conversation that might involve, yeah, I know, I struggle with that too. I've struggled with that too. What are some techniques you, student, have learned to deal with it? Begins to give us, like, break down these hierarchies. And so you see again this idea of caring with instead of caring for. And Allie, I am not familiar with that theory, but I might have Googled it while I was also paying attention to Jeff. And I'm very excited about hearing more about that. And if you are an expert in it, I would love to hear more from you as well at some point in the future. But it sounds like it would be a great thing for us to look into. So, Erin, that was a bit of a long question or answer, but you kind of queued me up for it. So.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. We have some questions coming in the chat, and I want to pivot to Olivia's question about how your team works to train and support faculty who are mentoring students in this space, or this sort of faculty development question.
Yeah, I love that question. And I will tell you that Jeff is one of our many faculty mentors. Among all of the many things Jeff does, all of the medical students that have had the honor of having Jeff as their professor would also tell you that he is a friend and mentor. So, Jeff, I would love to have you speak into how you see us preparing faculty who are mentoring our students through the lens of the framework.
So one of the things I didn't get the chance to really elaborate much on as it related to faculty is we actually do have a faculty cohort that, as you become sort of that faculty champion for these learner chapters, that as a faculty member, those members get together regularly as well. We also have a little training manual that we sort of run them through so that they understand how they can begin to enact the framework themselves. So, for example, they get opportunities to hear from us and others on the KNN team. What does it mean to actually care with, in addition to talk about how does virtue come into play? The faculty also are asked to serve a role that, that Kimara mentioned is sometimes a stretch for faculty, because we're sometimes so used to delivering content that we're not used to delivering, this is how I can help coach and work with you in that process. So there's some intentional time taken into this space to help our faculty sort of move in that concept that virtue is both sought, caught, and taught. Faculty like to spend a lot of time teaching it, but to help them recognize that by sharing their experiences and by sharing life together and by sharing how they see the framework apply to themselves, that they can move into that sort of caught and sought relationship with their learners and be an active part of the chapter. So there's sort of this both and, where the faculty both learn with our learners, but then they also learn together and have their own community of practice, as well as some ongoing training that happens in that space. Olivia, I hope that answered the question well.
It's interesting. We started with a question about the theory or the framework, and then we've moved to a question about faculty development in this space, or faculty and staff development. The next two questions from Leanna and David are really about the students themselves. And so, like, the first one is about how do you balance the rigor and demands of medical training with the cultivation of flourishing, with this focus on flourishing. So for students, for residents, for fellows, that sort of, how are they doing this balancing act? How are you integrating that kind of work? And then David's question about sort of how this is connecting with their own personal moral development. I wonder if you all could speak to sort of the student in this space and the competing demands. You mentioned, Kimara, in your first part of your presentation about the overemphasis on competence, and then the move here. So I wondered if you could just speak to the student in this space and both of those questions in this context.
Yeah, wow, those are such great questions, and I do think it really goes to the heart of it. And I think it varies. And the reason, there's many reasons it varies, but I do believe that the adoption or hesitancy on the part of the learner as they're thinking about moral development and these sorts of things has much to do with what they're seeing in their faculty and how the faculty are approaching it. And I'm going to have Jeff elaborate on this. I think that what we see is that where there is an understanding and a genuine authenticity on the part of those that are introducing the concepts, there is an openness on the part of the students to really think about it. When it feels as though yet another curricular element, or, and I'll be sort of tongue in cheek here, here's the moment where we all reflect. And then we sit there and we reflect, and then we go on, because check the box, we incorporated reflection into the classroom. The students pick up on that, right? Quick as lightning, and it doesn't feel authentic. And so that's one of the pieces that I think we really work on. And I think that's where the character space comes in so strong for us, is this idea of the caught, sought, taught, and how are we thinking about this in a wholeness of being approached. Jeff, would you please take that on?
I will hopefully add to that in a very constructive way. I think one of the things that happens as we all go through an educational process is we not only learn new skills and know new things, we also become those very things that we're learning and doing and knowing. And within the medical learner framework, our learners are seeking someone to help them serve as a guide as they go into this process of who am I being and becoming, as well as all this stuff of knowing going on around me. So there's actually a real openness on the students to move into the space to have sort of that guide to help them sort of sense make of not only what of all the stuff I need to know, but recognizing that they're moving into a profession where all the stuff they need to know needs to be highly applied. And so that's why one of the key things within the learner network is we use that word of applying the framework to your environment and to your situation. And we've really found that the students who join the chapters find this space by which they're excited to share it with their peers. And then they're excited to share what they're learning nationally. I would do a terrible job of trying to paraphrase what one of our students just said to us this week, but of how they mentioned that they were so influenced positively by having peers and a national movement that gave them a place to feel like they were cared with as they were going through the process of learning all this great material. So there's sort of this always been an undercurrent of both. And when we talk about medical education, we've talked about developing as a professional and developing that professional identity. So a lot of these materials are already within the sort of the medical learner experience. What we've tried to do is highlight those materials and make them happen in a way that feel really authentic to our learners and in a way that currently they're really excited about doing, rather than what I would call move into the space of becoming what Kimara suggested at sort of that reflective zombie, where we just reflect in ways in which it doesn't have meaning and relationship. And quite honestly, I'm also married to a physician. They practice this opportunity of collective phronesis all the time because they're always talking about those experiences. And so we're just really introducing something that they witness in their clinical peers from day one.
Yeah.
So it is a lot to bring on, but they have so much by which they're excited to share that it almost becomes a sense of greater support and greater capacity building.
That's great. We have a question in the chat so I'm pivoting now from students to thinking about healthcare systems. And Deborah has asked, she writes, coming from a mental health background, I'm accustomed to settings that are understaffed, overwhelmed, fairly chaotic. There's often skepticism about new initiatives that don't address the current realities. So how do you, KNN, approach healthcare systems that are less receptive to this kind of approach?
Well, let me start by saying most healthcare systems have been less receptive to this approach. So lest you wonder otherwise, that is the interesting challenge of the work. So let me say it to you this way. There is that. And then, Deborah, I would say the other struggle that we have is that most healthcare systems are looking for, I'm going to say KPI, the key performance indicators, that are what we might use the term very transactional. And what we are looking to come in and do is shift mental models and shift culture, which is more transformational. And, there are days where that's not always a quantitative number on a scale. Which isn't to say that there aren't ways to measure these things, but it isn't always in the same language that the health care systems are speaking. So what we do and where we have found a success thus far has been to erase the idea that this is a program or an initiative. and to instead find out what they're currently doing that they believe is working, where they see their gaps being, and we start to work with them in sort of a consultative fashion around how we could help enrich what they're doing. And we may not even use character, caring, practical wisdom, or flourishing to get started, because those words might cause people to have an allergic reaction. And we would like them to embody the concepts, and we're willing to wait with them, care with, walk that journey with them to the point that they get comfortable. So what we found right now, we've got about 6 healthcare systems right now that we're working with, some of them rather large. So we're excited about the potential of that. Is we are starting where they are at. Some of them are already using terms like character and flourishing. Others are like, please don't say those words here yet. We agree with you in concept. We need to do a little bit of contextualizing before we can get there. And so what we try to do is not have it be an add-on. The last thing, honestly, right? I mean, all of us, the last thing any of us want to hear is like, hey, we have a new thing for you. What we really want to do is think about how we could shift mental models within what people are already doing. So I hope that wasn't too confusing.
I think there's a lot of the folks on the call are working in undergraduate student contexts, and they're
Yep.
thinking about how to build capacity in their own institutions in this space. And I think that some of them are experiencing some of that same sort of resistance in terms of just the language itself. And I love
Yes.
the idea of coming in and saying, what are you already doing that you see as the sort of consultant space of like, this already embodies the concepts in important ways. What can we do to enrich that? I think that's a really important step in really deepening the work that's already perhaps already happening in these spaces. So that's really, really helpful. There's a question in the chat from Beatrice about sort of thinking about the adoption of a framework as a core requirement for medical school training, or how do schools of medicine go about partnering with you all? I want to add to that a third part of this, which is because of our focus on undergraduate students and thinking about pre-health or pre-medical education. What do you see as the potential connections for institutions in the ECI that are focused on undergraduate student formation, especially in the pre-professional, pre-health, pre-medical education space? So that's the question. It's a 3-part question now.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I appreciate that. Jeff, I would love to invite your voice into answering this one.
I'll start, but please, that's a big question. So I'll try to tackle them a little bit one at a time. Do we think that this could become a core requirement? I think we need to enter into that space carefully, right? So, that one of the challenges that I think we face, particularly with medical education, is it's easy for things to become a checkbox. And then once you've checked the box, you feel like you're done with that space. And I don't feel like character education or the KNN framework fits into that checkbox space, but I do think it fits into a space where longitudinally we need to think about how are we providing environments for it to be promoted, and how are we providing environments by which we can ask questions on its development. So I think that's sort of the mental model that we're hoping to move into with those who partner with us, is how can you think through the experiences that you provide your faculty, your staff, and your learners, to think through ways by which you provide opportunity for the promotion and the development. And I know that's a challenge, because that's a very unique mental model for, at least in the field of medicine, which really likes to think through, can we check these boxes and make sure we've checked all the boxes? I think a little bit, some of that relates to what you asked about in the undergraduate space for folks who do want to move into healthcare professions, is there is that tendency to can we check all the boxes and get all of those checkbox in? But I would also encourage everyone, having served on an admissions committee for almost a decade, the key questions we ask our incoming applicants is, why do you want to do this? What do you know about yourself that helps you know that this is a good profession for you? Because we know on the backside that what's going to provide for their longevity is their ability to tap into their virtue, their ability to practice practical wisdom, their ability to remain both empathetic and caring, and see each person as an awe-inspiring, unique moment, not just the job that I've done day after day after day. So, I think part of what the KNN is trying to help going to those blue concentric rings of the system, we're really trying to help the system begin to think through what are some more intentional ways that we can authentically move into that space. And part of partnering with us is moving into the newness of what we're putting forward with the framework and helping us understand what some of those parameters might look like or how we might shape that out. You'll notice that when Kimara shared with you about the KNN framework, we didn't give you like 7 steps or 12 steps or any steps, because we do realize the contextuality of this, as well as sort of what we call the partner practitioner model where we're learning together. Kimara, are there things you'd love to add?
No, I might just say that when we first started, we were all gung-ho about this becoming part of the accreditation requirements and how amazing that would be. And then we, I think, all had a moment of like, oh my goodness, because we watched what had happened to other things like wellness and well-being or other things that had gone into accreditation standards. And they got so diluted and watered down that we no longer had the complexity or the nuance. And so one of the things that actually Jeff is excellent at is challenging people to look at accreditation standards or look at objectives that already exist and figure out how this could help answer that. Right. And so it's that idea of, okay, if we have well-being or wellness initiatives, or if we have some sort of formation requirements, how is what we're doing an answer to that? And that also then helps with, number one, as we've said, making explicit what's already going on. Sometimes people just need the language to know, but then also not adding, not being additive, but rather pulling out and bringing solutions.
So there are 2 more questions in the chat that I want to get to in our remaining time, but I want to just quick follow up on this thread. In particular, I'm thinking about undergraduate education. I'm thinking about pre-health, pre-medical education. Jeff, you mentioned in part of your discussion.
Hey, I just bought this.
Hold on just a minute.
Went to my boat.
Thank you. Sorry. So Jeff, you mentioned in your presentation about you might be moving more into a space where you're thinking about pre-health or pre-medical education as well as part of the KNN network. I'm wondering, here's the question: what difference would it make if an undergraduate institution said, we want to try to align our pre-health or pre-medical education with this kind of approach? What difference would it make to the students who show up to medical school, to the work that you all do in medical education at that higher level?
First off, one of the things that I know throughout the system, those of us who are in positions of sort of helping the progression from med student to resident to faculty member or clinician, one of the biggest questions we have is, will you find this as enriching and rewarding as you look at the moment of your application and of your interview? So, and again, I think that the process with this is, as we help our undergraduate learners understand how they can bring their virtue forward, how they can authentically move into that sense of describing to themselves and to us their wholeness of being and doing, how they're realizing their full potential, how being a nurse brings that full potential forward, how being a pharmacist brings that potential forward, how serving as a physician or someone who moves into behavioral health, as they can then sort of articulate to those programs how that brings forward their wholeness of being and doing. I think it helps at a minimum, it helps those of us who are on the admissions side of things of going, oh yeah, we can see that. You have now shared for us the glimpses of the journey of how this brings you wholeness and being and doing, because at the end of the day, from an educator's perspective, that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you as the learner move into that space of wholeness of being and doing. If you can already reassure to me that you've done some of that work, it makes the system that much better for us then to build on that and to bring that to the forefront. I also think, as we think about this in the undergraduate space, at a minimum, it allows us to work with our learners to ask the questions of, where are you on that journey of wholeness of being and doing? Have you asked the questions beyond, well, I seen it on TV, or somebody told me I should do this, or gee, the money looks really good, to actually move into that space of asking the question of, is this helping you realize your full potential as well as those around you? So that would be sort of, I think, some of the minimal ways in which moving into this space could be helpful for both our undergraduates and for the faculty on the side who are working with those folks when they move into their professions.
I might just add that we do already have those in the pre-professional space that are really interested, excuse me, in working with us on this. And so if there are those that are interested, we would love to talk to you. And I think everything that Jeff said is really true. And I might just answer a little bit more of a formative way, which is to say that there's a lot of research out there that shows that by the time folks arrive at medical school, they're already burned out. And so what I was thinking about, Aaron, when you answered that question, was that if this started in the pre-professional space, we might have individuals that actually arrive at medical school in more of a flourishing state than we do now. And I think that could be really powerful for the profession.
That's really good. That's helpful. And it actually connects with one of the two questions that are remaining in the chat. Allie has asked about what you all are doing to address system issues that detract from flourishing, especially in those spaces where people sort of gaslight others for not being resilient enough. So the systems that create contexts where they need to be resilient. And I think that connects directly with Kimara, with what you were saying a little bit about showing up with burnout. I wonder if you might say a little bit about addressing those sort of system level issues as part of your work.
I'd be happy to start, and then Jeff, please do if there's anything that you'd like to add. I will tell you that the systemic level is where we are interested in working. Which doesn't mean that we aren't for individual flourishing, but we believe that, you know, the strongest work is to do this at the systemic level. I used to, when I was in faculty development, I would call the resilient speak the fix the faculty method, right? Which is just like, well, Aaron, if you would just be more resilient, you wouldn't worry about what's going on in the system, right? So what I think that we have to do, and what we do is be super transparent and honest about it. So this is where I like to lean into non-ideal theory. And non-ideal theory says we recognize and see that which is broken, and we choose to move forward anyway. So we choose to do something. So to me, the healthcare delivery system in this country is broken. The med ed system as it exists today is broken. And so we want to be very honest about that. And we want to talk about the fact that it is a system level brokenness. It is not an individual brokenness. And that in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that that does seem rather insurmountable, or, you know, sort of Riddle and Weber's definition of a wicked problem, I would say the things that are going on here are that we do believe that there are many, many different levers that need to be pulled. And we want to work with organizations to figure out how to do that. So I think we have to be honest about it, and then we need to keep moving forward. And in many ways, this is where I think we need to really exercise the virtue of courage to say we're going to do something, even though we might get resistance.
Jeff, did you want to add anything there?
I think I would maybe add, and this might also move into answering some of the questions that Nancy mentioned about mental models. Usually we ask those who partner with us, as Kimara mentioned, to begin to do something, to start somewhere, to move into some spaces, whether it's a large initiative or whether it's simply a moment and a way to bring moments upon moments, rather than thinking through we have to transform the whole system at once. And, you know, we've had opportunities where individual faculty members, you know, I tend to be more of my instructional focus tends to be a little bit more in anatomy. And so we have anatomy peers who have looked for how they could repurpose objectives that they needed to bring forward in the anatomy learning space to look for ways in which they could talk about character development or virtue development, or where they might be facing moral injury, or where they might be struggling as they're working through the curriculum. And in the process of that happening with one part of the curriculum, it then moves into other aspects of the curriculum, to where we now have faculty task force looking at how can we look for ways to promote flourishing within our advising systems. So, you know, what Kimara mentioned, I think part of the process is to take an honest and open look and see like, where do we have some gaps? And then where can flourishing move into those spaces to bring some developmental change to objectives that we already have to meet? And in doing that, those mental models can happen and shift. I also do think it's important to recognize that as that shift happens, we also need to have the courage to challenge those who are in positions of leadership, who can then ask the question of, how do we make this become part of our culture? Like, well, we've seen it work well here in this one place, but could it really be something that transforms what we're doing holistically? And those become bigger questions, because now you're working, from at a K through 12 system, you're asking principals and administrators, how do they want to move that into being? In our case, we're talking about deans and provosts of how that wants to move forward. But I feel like the question on resilience, I just wanted to add one little sidebar. Most of the learners who I engage with right now, they don't want to be talked at about resilient. They already feel pretty resilient in the first place. And if you bring up the words resilience, they like, no, we don't need to talk about resilience. We need to talk about, how can you help guide me through this process? I know it's going to require me to be resilient. So I think there's a bit of a good shift from our learners' point of view, in that they have the courage to speak up and be like, no, we don't need to talk about resilience. We need to talk about systems change and promoting and moving that forward. So thanks, Nancy. I'm glad that I could help the question. I think part of it is the way we've tried to help people think through it is, I tend to use the words, today you can do a flourishing moment. You can take our framework of character, caring, and practical wisdom and have a moment on any one of those concepts. And moments lead to initiatives, and initiatives lead to transformation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's actually a wonderful place to wrap up our conversation today. One of the things I love about this conversation is we've talked about particular virtues. We've talked about the role that virtues and character can play in transforming individuals, students, faculty, staff, administrators, systems, institutions, and we're thinking deeply about the role of those character traits within the context of community. So Jeff, Kimara, thank you so much for your contributions to this first of our webinar series this semester. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please join our community, sign up for the webinar series and the book club, and we will see you all in September.